Okay, we are here today with Lynn Hahn for the Veterans History Project. And like I said, we'll just kind of start with the early history about your parents and what year were you born?
I was born in 1931
Okay, and where was that?
in Beaverton, Michigan.
Okay. And what did your parents do?
My father was a Methodist minister, and of course my mother was a minister's wife.
Okay.
And we actually, I think when I was born in Beaverton in 31, I think before I was even a half year old, we moved to Gobles, Michigan. And they were there 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then to Martin, Michigan, then to Buchanan, Michigan, then to Clare, Michigan, and then to Alma, Michigan.
Moved a lot.
So as a kid, being born, and by the time I got through high school, it'd be all those places that we'd moved from.
So you went to a lot of different schools.
A lot of different schools, yeah.
Okay.
But I think that was typical of ministers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have two brothers, brother Jim and brother Gordon, and then I have a sister that's Betty, and they're still alive and doing well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you were in your maybe early teens during the World War II when you were in
Yes.
school?
Yes,
What was
I was.
that like?
Well, I guess the things that I remember, I think I was in the Cubs and Boy Scouts,
Mm-hmm.
that there was quite a lot of help in trying to gather things that could be used in the war effort,
To be sent?
in like newspapers, and I think our garage was full of newspapers because our garage was a collecting center for
Oh.
for newspapers or
Mhm.
paper, which was recycled and used. And the other thing that I vaguely remember was rationing. What sugar, and I think tires, and gasoline, and a lot of things that we just take for granted.
But you were pretty young when that
Yeah.
happened, so
Yeah.
don't remember any bad times with your parents or any of the news or?
Not really, no.
Okay.
No.
And what year did you graduate?
1949 from Clare High School. Yeah.
And did you get a job right after that or go to college?
The plan was that I'd go to college, so I went to Alma College, and I played football, basketball, and baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I was put on probation.
Or you got bad grades? Too much time with sports?
And I didn't study that much. I wasn't serious about studying.
Okay.
And so I left school, went to work for a house trailer factory
Mm-hmm.
called New Moon Trailer in Alma, Michigan. And I worked there almost, well, not a year. But of course I was interested in women, girls, and I did eventually meet my wife-to-be.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to talking about marriage, and I knew that I was going to be drafted. I mean, I was eligible, age was right, and so as we got more serious, the question came: should we get married before I go,
Or wait?
or wait?
Okay.
So we decided that we'd get married before.
Mm-hmm.
So we got married the 28th of September, 1951,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in the service on January 2nd, 52. So we really had 3 months together.
So you said you were pretty sure you were going to be drafted. Did you know a lot of other people that were being drafted at the time?
Oh yeah.
And did you pay attention to the news about the war? Did you know a lot about what was going on?
I think once you know that you're maybe going to be involved, you get a lot more interested. Yeah.
Okay.
So early in that war, it was not good.
Mm-hmm.
Things were not good. So I had no idea what I was going to get into. So
Okay. And you say you got your draft papers then in January?
I got them in December.
In December,
But
okay.
to report, and I think the record shows that I was inducted 2nd of January.
Okay, and what was that like?
Well, you're leaving your wife,
Mhm.
but I had a smart wife, and I think we planned for the future,
Mhm.
hoping nothing would happen, and that seemed to work out well. I think my family was all concerned, and I remember we got on a bus in Elma, and my dad and mother were there, and some relatives. And as I recall, my dad said something. He said, he said, I don't mind your going, and I wouldn't really mind if you never came back, if there was never going to be another war.
Mhm.
So, he knew what he was. And I think since then, there's been several wars that we've been involved in, so, yeah.
So, where did you go for the induction then?
Actually, they took us by bus to, I think it was a hotel in Detroit,
Okay.
and I think they tried to explain to you what you were doing there, and I think one of the things that I remember there was that they said, we need Marines, we need 50 Marines, and they said, we'll take volunteers, and if we don't get enough volunteers, we'll pick volunteers. So,
Okay.
just happened to be there were enough that said they would go to the Marines,
Oh.
which was my first break.
Okay.
And then I think the next day we were sent to Fort Custer,
Okay.
which was what they call, I think, a distribution center.
Mhm. In Battle Creek?
Yep, yep.
And then you were just there for a couple days probably?
Well, it turns out that I was there a couple days, and they called me in and they said, we see you can type. I had taken typing in high school, and I think the only reason I took typing is because that's where all the girls were.
Uh-huh.
And I might have been able to type maybe 20 words a minute after corrections, but it was in my record.
Mm.
And they said, we need somebody in the office to help type release records for veterans that were being flown from Korea, and their time was up, and so they needed to be discharged.
Mhm.
And I was told that I could be there minimum of 30 days.
And that was in the
Yeah.
office at Fort Custer?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so really all I did was type. And I remember that the officer in charge of the office had served in World War II,
Mhm.
and he had been reactivated, and he was a bitter man.
Yeah.
He was real bitter. But anyway, I actually stayed there, I think, about 40 days.
Mhm.
And then they came and they just said, we can't keep you anymore, we gotta get you to basic training. So here I am in the Army, and I haven't even had basic training for 40 days. And so I remember going with an officer to a building, and we went in this building, and the officer said to this guy behind the desk, he said, where is Lynn Hahn scheduled to go? And the guy looked in his records, and he said that he's scheduled to go when he's ready to Fort Campbell, Kentucky,
Okay.
which I think is a paratrooper camp. Now, whether you had to jump out of an airplane, I don't know, but I think they also did infantry basic training there. And he had asked me, he said, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I don't have any idea. And he said, well, Fort Lee, Virginia is a quartermaster training center. And he said the weather's not too bad in Virginia either this time of year, because it was, February. So the guy just pulled my card out of one box, slipped it into another, and said he's all set.
Okay.
So a few days, I was on my way to Fort Lee, Virginia.
Did you take a bus there or a train?
A plane.
Oh.
We flew,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah.
With a lot of other people that were going there as well?
There were a few, yeah. So I get there, and of course you get indoctrinated real quick for basic training. And in the quartermaster at Fort Lee, you would actually do an 8-week basic training, and then then you go to one of the schools that quartermaster handles, like cooking, supply, and, you know, that's sort of, it's really a support effort for the people that are fighting, really.
Okay.
And at the end of the 8 weeks basic, you know, it looks like there's openings at different times for these specialties, like the cooking and the quartermaster supply. But it just happened to be there was, they posted openings for people who wanted to go into Graves registration. And I think that was sort of unusual because it didn't open up very often.
Okay.
But the rumor was that if you went through that school and graduated, that you would go to Europe and maintain cemeteries in Europe.
Oh, and that was better than going to Korea. Okay.
How naive can you be?
Well, what was basic training like? How was that for you? Was it rough or was it?
Well, basic training is rough no matter how you look at it.
Okay.
'Cause they get you up at what, 5 in the morning, and you go out and march, run, and you know, if you're not used to severe discipline, it's a major change in your lifestyle.
Mm.
So, you know, I didn't like it really.
Okay.
And they're there to make sure that you know how to follow the instructions and the rules, so it's tough. And physically it's tough too.
Mm.
Really tough. And what you learn really, you learn how to kill really. They give you a gun.
Mm.
And you spend a lot of time, well, you sleep with a gun almost, yeah. And you learn how to throw hand grenades, how to strangle people, and, you know, it's war. So,
That was 8 weeks?
yes,
And then the Graves registration, did you do that in Virginia or did you get?
that's right there at the
Okay.
Fort Lee Quartermaster camp, yeah.
And how long were?
That's 8 weeks.
That was 8 weeks as
Yeah.
well. And what were the classes like?
They covered what you'd consider to be all the essentials of basic training for Graves registration, and that is handling of the dead,
Mhm.
ones that are killed. And I actually have, it might be in that one too. Yeah, I think it is. See if I can find it. It actually has a subtitle of duties of a Graves registration specialist, and it just starts out: collects, evacuates, and identifies the dead, searches battlefields for unburied or unsuitably buried dead and for isolated and unmarked graves, covers the dead with raincoats or shelter halves, and carries them to forward area collecting points. So really it's a whole process of taking care of the dead.
Okay. And during that time, you thought hopefully that you would be going to Europe. You said
Well,
earlier, right?
Yeah, until,
So they were still in 1952 going through the dead from World War II in Europe?
well, there were established cemeteries in
Uh-huh.
there, and they really need to be maintained.
Okay.
And apparently, Graves registration was involved in the maintenance of those established cemeteries.
Okay.
And did you see Private Ryan, Saving Private
Mhm.
Ryan? Remember the guy walking through the graves when it first opened up?
I think so.
Yeah. You know, those are huge cemeteries,
Uh-huh.
and they need maintenance. You know, the Americans are known for taking care of their dead in their cemeteries, military cemeteries, so, yeah. But when, I think a few days before we graduated, we understood that chances are we were going to Korea.
Okay.
And then when we got our orders and said report to Fort Lewis, Washington,
Mhm.
I said, that's the wrong way to go. Unless you're gonna go all the way around.
Mhm.
So, anyway, but this gives a good description of the training that goes in. So, you know, 8 weeks is quite a long time to go through that sort of training.
Were the classes like hands-on with real bodies?
Not normally, but we did actually visit a morgue,
Mhm.
yeah, so.
Was that
in-
new to you? Was it really
Sort
odd?
of, sort of new.
Yeah.
Yes, it's different, that's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when we get into my going to Korea, I can explain a little bit more about that.
Okay, so then you had to go to Washington.
State of Washington, yeah,
And-
Fort Lewis, yeah.
You pretty much understood at that point, were you gonna be taking like a big ship with a bunch of others to Korea?
Right.
Okay. And do you remember the date around when you left Washington?
In August, I think.
And that's 52?
52.
Okay.
Right. You know, when you leave Fort Lee, they give you a little time to go home,
Uh-huh.
and then you are supposed to report to Washington
Uh-huh.
at a certain day, no later than. So, being conscientious, I was there a day ahead of time.
Okay.
And turns out then we waited for guys that were late.
Mhm.
And they didn't get punished either, at least to my knowledge.
Hmm.
But we were there a few days, and really they try to keep you busy. I remember having to wash pots and pans and stuff like that, but things to keep you busy.
Mhm.
And then you're right, we got on a troop ship to go to Korea.
Was it a really big ship? Do you remember the name of it?
I sure do. The Private Sadeo S. Munamori.
Never heard of that one.
And it was an old victory ship,
Uh-huh.
about 500 feet long, which is not very long.
Was it really crowded then?
Just packed full of soldiers.
How many people do you think were on it?
Hey, you know, I'm not sure. All I know is it was full.
Mm.
And it was named after a Japanese American that served in World War II, and I think he won the Medal of Honor for bravery. So they named this crazy ship after him.
Mhm.
But you know, I've thought about being seasick, but never being on a big boat before. It was a new experience. And even when the boat was still in dock, it was kind of moving a little bit. There were guys getting sick just from
Before
that,
you even left?
Before you even got out of the dock. But, and I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And I said I'd never get sick. But 3 days out of Washington, we ran into some bad weather. And this boat, it would actually crest a wave and go up over a wave, and then the propeller would come out of the water and it would shake. And I think after a day of that, I came down the stairs, and there were 3 guys sitting around a metal can, and they were all throwing up in the can. That was it for me. And the odor, you know, the odor gets terrible. So those are things you remember. That I really, and once you're seasick, it's not a good experience.
You said there was some bad weather. Was it just some big storms?
Just the water, you know, the waves were high and wind, and in a small ship like that, it just gets moved around a little bit.
Do you remember if you traveled in a convoy, if there's other ships?
No.
Just that one?
As far as we know, as far as I know, there was no other ship or convoy. Yeah.
Were you,
Yeah.
is anybody worried about coming across any Korean submarines or being attacked or anything on the way there?
Well, I was.
You were?
I remember the level that I was at, I think was right at the water level.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how thick the steel is on those ships, but it would actually move. And, you know, you get to wondering, you know, what if a torpedo comes through there? It's not gonna be pleasant. But
Mhm.
I think, as far as I know, there was never a submarine attack on an American ship in the Korean War, to my knowledge. Yeah.
Do you remember how long the voyage took?
I think it took about 15 days. That's in there, I think, but about 15 days. Another interesting thing that, I think one morning they said that they were gonna dock. And, you know, didn't know what that was all about, but I got up in the morning, went up on deck, and here's this ship going in water that's just absolutely glass clear. I
Mm.
mean, and then here's great big sort of mountains coming right out of this water. And the ship is going between these sort of mountains. We actually landed at one of the Aleutian Islands called Adak.
Okay.
And they docked, and we got out and did exercises. We got back on the boat after a couple hours and
Oh.
took off again.
Hmm.
And the rumor was that there was actually a soldier that had just gone berserk, and they needed to get him off the ship.
Wow.
So, and I just don't know what that was all about, but
Uh-huh.
that was the rumor.
Okay.
So, and I think if you look at the globe, going up to the Aleutian Islands is sort of almost the straight distance to go to Japan. I mean, if you go to Hawaii, it's going off to the south quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I remember that quite well. And it was a beautiful sight. Yeah.
And then did you go right to Korea or?
Go to Yokohama,
Okay.
and I think we got off the boat and took a train to a camp American camp near Yokohama.
Mhm.
I can't remember how many days, but I think it was 4 or 5 days that I spent there. But one of the most important things about that was that they tried to explain to the soldiers why we were there.
Uh-huh.
And they would have, we were in a big room, and they had a map, and they had part of the map colored red, and that was representing communism. So Russia, China, and Korea. And they just said, we got to stop, the red from expanding.
Okay.
So that was really the big reason that we were given.
Okay.
And I guess at the time it seemed reasonable.
Uh-huh.
Because we were in a Cold War, really, with Russia. Yeah.
Did they think, or did you or anybody else think at the time that it could be possible that you might even be getting in a war with Russia? Like there might be Russians in Korea when you went there?
Well, I think at that time, we were in a Cold War with Russia, so
Right.
we really didn't know. And, we really didn't know what participation Russia might have in Korea.
Mhm.
But I don't know if you remember after World War II, the winning countries sort of split Europe up and Asia up. And in Asia, they separated Korea into North Korea and South Korea.
Mhm.
So, and it was about halfway up through the Korean peninsula there.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think there was concern that Russia could be influential, and I think it was known that. What might not have been known at the time was that China was also interested.
Mhm.
That was not good for the United States.
No. What was that camp like compared to American camps? Was it in good condition?
The one in Japan,
Mhm.
it was an American camp.
Compared to what you had been in the States, though, was it?
Oh, yeah. Although I think in taking that train to that camp, one of the things you noticed was, I think, a country had been through the war,
Mhm.
and I'm sure food was a problem. It always has been a problem for Japan. But, they would grow crops right up to the railroad tracks almost. So everything that could be used to grow things was being used.
Okay.
Yeah. And things look primitive. I mean, not a lot of cars,
Mhm.
more animal travel, bicycles. You notice that right away. Yeah.
You were only there for about 5 days
Just a
then?
few days, yeah.
And then did you have to go to another ship?
Yep.
Another one?
Then we went on a bigger ship.
Okay.
And actually, I think that only took a day or so, or a day and a half.
Mhm.
But we actually landed at Incheon,
Mhm.
which when I went there, this was after MacArthur decided to get behind the Chinese and the North Koreans. And so there was this big landing at Incheon,
Okay.
which was successful.
Mhm.
But we landed at the same area. The unique thing about that was that there's one of the world's largest tides large tide.
Mm-mm.
I mean, the water level is like this, and within just a few hours, it goes down like this.
Oh.
So you couldn't take the boat into harbor. You actually docked the boat out where the water was deep, and then they would put you in landing crafts. There's a picture of one in there.
And then you had to take a whole bunch of those to get on?
Take a little teeny boat, these landing
Okay.
crafts, and take them into the shore. Yeah. But they'd stack you in there. There's a picture in there. Shows you how packed they had you.
And so, did you go to another fort or a camp after you got there?
Well, I think there were a few of us that were assigned to graves registration.
Mhm.
And when we got there, we then traveled to what was later to be known to us as 23rd Group Headquarters.
Okay.
So we were in a quartermaster group, and that's where we were sent, and then we'd be distributed wherever we were needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long was it before you were called on to go to a certain area?
Actually, just a few days,
Mhm.
and I was sent to Gwangju, Korea.
Okay.
Gwangju's sort of right in the middle of the peninsula.
Okay.
And at that time, it was about, I'd say, 50 miles from the front. And that's where the headquarters of the 148th Graves Registration Company was, where I
Mhm.
spent all my time in Korea. So,
What are the living quarters like in the area that you stayed at?
at the 148th, actually, they were pretty good. We had Quonset huts,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, it's not too bad, really.
So you're there, it was in the summer?
I got
Well,
there.
in
I
the
got there
United
in
States, it was in the summer.
Well, I got there though late August.
So, was it in the winter there?
No.
Okay, because
Same-
I've heard
same
Korea
time.
gets pretty cold.
Yeah, in the wintertime.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
In
the
fact,
weather wasn't too bad.
No, at that time.
Okay.
I think the most memorable thing about that when I first got to Korea was Koreans, of course, were planting rice.
Mm-hmm.
And they have rice paddies, and they use human waste as a fertilizer. Have you ever heard of that?
Yep.
Well, in the summertime, you can actually look across a field of rice and see the striations in the air, you know, and the odor is not pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're there for 5 or 6 days, all of a sudden you don't even smell it anymore. The nose just gets acclimated.
So you started to get to work then, just pretty soon.
Actually, the day that there were several of us arrived, and I'm guessing by several, it might have been 10
Uh-huh.
men that were assigned. And the reason for that is they were replacing soldiers that were supposed to be out, getting out.
Okay.
And I remember they got us in a formation, and they thanked us for coming and welcomed us to 148th Graves Registration. And then the guy said, we need some help in the mortuary.
Mhm.
And I happened to be the end guy on this formation. He said, you two guys on the end go down to the mortuary. Now, you know, we talked earlier about seeing
Mhm.
dead people, and I hadn't seen very many.
And this is probably a lot different from what you saw.
A little bit different
Really?
too, yeah. And so we actually went to the mortuary where the remains were, clothes were taken off. There was fingerprints taken of the deceased. Records, noticed in moving a dead soldier to headquarters involved papers, of course, lots of papers, and transferring from his company to our platoon collecting points that were real close to the front.
Okay.
And from then there, they would be brought to headquarters where this work was done, fingerprinting. And we didn't do any positive identification at all. That was done later. But when I was in Korea, they had established a pretty formal procedure for handling of the current dead. And that was they would come to our headquarters, have these things done, and then the bodies were refrigerated.
Okay.
And until there were enough to have a flight that took the bodies to Japan, where there was a mortuary.
Mhm.
And there the bodies were embalmed and first positively identified, and then embalmed, and then casketed, and then made ready for the trip back to the States.
So that was, you spent a lot of time just doing that while you were in Korea?
Well, actually, I spent some time in the mortuary, but usually only when there was like a lot of casualties coming.
Mhm.
But the first job, aside from that, was what they call search and recovery.
Okay.
And in February of 1951, when the Chinese had gotten into the war,
Mhm.
they pushed the Americans, of course, back to this, close to this 38th parallel.
Mhm.
And the Chinese, we finally got them stopped. And one of the areas where they were stopped was right around this town of Wanju.
Mhm.
So there were quite a lot of fighting going on in that Wanju area. And so there would be remains that were never accounted for in those battles.
Mhm.
And what we would get is a battle report, a formal report about a battle, and if there were missing soldiers in that battle, and where they were last seen. In other words, there would be witnesses that would testify that they had seen this man,
Mhm.
certain day, certain place. And then we would actually go out into that area and see if we could find the remains. And I think the first thing that we would do would be to go to the natives that lived in the area and just say, hey, do you know of any remains that might be around? And we actually had interpreters with us.
Mhm.
And but then if that didn't help, then we'd actually go to the area and actually spread out and search the area foot by foot,
Mhm.
looking for any foxholes, bunkers, where remains might be, any soft dirt or an indication that a body had been buried. And so that was search and recovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you work pretty much every day, or did you have time off on the weekends?
Work every day.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. They had chapel there.
Mhm.
We could go to church on Sundays if you wished.
Mhm.
Yeah. And once again, at that time in the war, there would be spurts of activity on the front. So, some days you'd be very busy and other days might be slack.
Mhm.
So, but there was always things to do,
Mhm.
even in the slack time. Yeah.
And you said you worked with some interpreters. Were those South Korean, or were they?
Yes, yes.
How did you get along with the people there that you had to work with?
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and we actually had a small Republic of Korea outfit with us.
Mhm.
I'd say, as I recall, it might be eight Korean soldiers
Mhm.
that would actually go with us. Yeah.
Did you ever come into contact with any Chinese?
Not personally, no.
Okay. And
No,
so
no. You mean as far as deceased Chinese?
any Chinese?
Yeah, no live Chinese.
Okay,
thank
so
goodness.
you did have
But-
some Chinese
But if we
bodies.
would find bodies
Mhm.
that were enemy soldiers,
Uh-huh.
we would handle them just like we would our own. Write a report as to where the body was found, and we'd take care of the body. And they would actually, we'd establish temporary cemeteries
Okay.
where they would be buried with formal burial bottles that had the record.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that's sort of covered in that too.
Okay. So while you were in Korea, didn't get any time on leave or anything like that?
Just They tried to send soldiers on R&R, they
Uh-huh.
called it, and that would be a trip to Japan.
Mhm.
And as I recall, it was like a week, and I went once,
Mhm.
yeah.
How was that?
Well, it's nice. They send you to like a hotel, and I think the first thing that happens is they clean you up and shave, give you a shave and shower, and new clothes, fresh clothes, and there were all kinds of things to do.
Mhm.
I think there was swimming there. I think you could bicycle, and I think they had little motorized motorcycles that you could take and visit some of the land.
So you got to go there for a week?
Yeah, I think it was about a week, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I read something about writing letters. Did you write a lot of letters back to your
I
family?
tried to write my wife every day,
Mhm.
and my family, occasionally. She lived in the same town as my parents,
Mhm.
other parts of my family. So, I could write to her and she could tell them how things are going.
Mhm.
But, and it wasn't every day, because some days you just didn't have a chance. But she actually kept all those letters. And when I was doing this interview, of course, those were important.
Mhm.
Because almost 50 years later, I'm sure I'd have never remembered a lot of things that I'd written in the letters. That now here's the chronology and the information besides. So it made it easy to give an interview. Easier, I should say.
Yeah. While you were working in Korea, did you know what was going on with the progress of the war? Did you know, or were you kind of like in your own little world?
No, I think there was attempts to try to make sure everybody knew what was going on, and there was information available.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course you were sort of directly involved. And
Mhm.
here's the front, men are being killed, and here you are 50 miles away. You get information as to what's going on. I don't think I ever was fearful. I guess the main thing would be if you were on search and recovery,
Uh-huh.
that you might run into some mines.
Oh.
So there was always a concern about that. And I don't, in the group that I was with at headquarters, I never had an incidence of having a mine go off. But I think up in our platoons, there was one occasion that I remember that one did, and a soldier was wounded. And the other thing, we actually had foxholes on our compound, and we would have what they call air alerts. In other words, an unidentified plane might be heading that way, and so if it was normally at night. I don't know why that is, but that's the way it is. They'd come through and say, okay, you got an air alert, so you had to jump out of bed and jump in this foxhole.
Oh.
Which, after a while, it gets so you think, well, this is a false alarm, as it always was.
Oh.
So, you try to stay in bed, but they come in and, all right, get out of there.
Uh-huh.
So, but we never had an airplane strike us. And I don't know if you know the history, but I think the United States and the United Nations dominated the air, especially over South Korea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you there then when the ceasefire occurred?
Yes. Yeah.
And how was that for you?
Well, it was great. And just before the ceasefire, I think there was less activity on the front too.
Did you
So we
expect that something like that was going to be happening soon then?
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as work is concerned, as I recall, and that's in that memoir, maybe 3 or 4 months before the ceasefire, there was a order came down to the graves registration units to consolidate all of the temporary small cemeteries for enemy dead and transfer them to one main cemetery. And the reason for that was that if there was an exchange of war dead, which there was eventually,
Mhm.
concern of theirs too, I think. They didn't want Americans or United Nations walking all over North Korea. So the remains from these temporary cemeteries were actually exhumed, disinterred, and moved to this larger cemetery. And for us, that meant a lot of work, really.
Yeah.
We were working 7 days a week, all the time. The only time we weren't working was when you had guard duty or you were allowed to sleep, I think, I don't know, 6 hours or something. So, you'd actually take the burial bottle from the remains, open it up, and you had to indicate where the body had been, which was already there, but then indicate where it was being transferred to, and the reason for the transfer, and then, of course, documentation as to who authorized it. But, you know, that was a major effort, and there was pressure to get it done quickly, so it could be, the exchange could be done soon after the ceasefire was signed.
How long did you spend on that project?
I'd say about 3 months,
Okay.
2 to 3 months, yeah. Yeah, and I was involved in the paperwork, mainly.
Okay.
Now, let's see, I haven't told you why I'm in the office, have I? I think I spent about a month, a little over a month on search and recovery. And they called me in the office one day and they said, "We see you can type." So here we go again.
Okay.
And we need somebody in operations that can type. And so I spent really the rest of my term in Korea in the operations section of the Graves Registration Company.
Was that a good thing for you then, that you didn't have to be out there doing?
Well, it was a good job, really,
Yeah.
because you're indoors. And you, in operations, you get to see what's going on all over, you know, with the company. So you learn the objectives and goals of the company, what's expected of you.
Okay.
Yep, so it was a good job. Had a great boss. He was also drafted, but he didn't finish college. I think he was a journalism major. And a smart guy, but a nice guy too. Pleasure to work for. And I actually talked to him on the phone just a couple days ago. He said lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he's suffering from Parkinson's, but he's doing all right. So, but we have some things in common. Yeah.
So are you working in the office then when you learned about the ceasefire?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And
I don't know if you know that the exchange of war dead was called Operation Glory.
never heard of that.
Yeah. And it was a big operation. It's in the internet, but there's some information in my memoir too. But as I recall, there were roughly 4,000 Americans that were exchanged by Chinese and North Korea. And we exchanged to them about 3 to 4 times that many, around 15,000.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of bodies. That's right. So it was a big deal. Yeah. And if you go on the internet and just say Korean War, Operation Glory, it gives you all kinds of statistics and why it was done, how it was done.
What was your part in working there then after the ceasefire? You continued working in the office for a while?
Yeah. And at that time too, there were some of our company headquarters people that were actually moved up to platoons to help with that Operation Glory. And so, you know, as far as current remains, it essentially stopped.
Okay.
And so, really it was a time to try to keep people busy. Because soldiers that aren't busy cause problems, it must be. So, but there were some projects that we got involved with, and one was to build an enlisted men's club house. And
did you take part in that? Is like
Yeah, I
actually the
helped
building of it?
a little bit, not
Mhm.
much, but anybody that wasn't doing something was working on it probably. And then we had, when you get together with a bunch of young Americans, it just seems like they all have some skill or talent that's useful.
Mhm.
And so you cut these guys loose in building a enlisted men's clubhouse, things get going.
Mhm.
And there was a good friend of mine that also was a finished carpenter in civilian life. But we actually built it was like a shower room. And so you could actually go there and shave. And actually had hot water above, so you could actually take a shower,
Mhm.
which is a nice thing. But it was really nice.
So in building this club, were you expecting that you were going to be there a lot longer then?
Well, no, because I knew my discharge date would be December or 2nd of January, but they usually let you out a little bit ahead.
Okay.
So I knew I only had to go through to December. So
What month was it that they started building that?
as I recall, it might have been around July.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then for that next 6 months, you basically just had to do a lot of more paperwork and doing with the exchanges and?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And then what was your discharge like?
Well, coming home, I was in a big ship.
Mhm.
It makes all the difference in the world. So if you go across the ocean, you get a big ship.
Okay.
And I didn't get sick on that one, but there were a lot of soldiers there. But I think a couple things that I remember, as I recall, we were maybe a couple, 300 miles from shore, from the United States shore. And they came on the loudspeaker and said we were starting to pick up radio stations.
Mhm.
And they turned to the station, here's a woman singing, and her name was Giselle McKenzie. And she was a good singer. And I knew who it was. It was great to hear, her voice over the loudspeaker. And the other thing was we came into San Francisco, so we actually went under the Golden Gate Bridge, which is nice if you're an American, wanting to come home. Yep.
So you arrived in California.
Yep.
Did you take a train back home then?
I actually took a train from San Francisco and actually went down south through Texas and then came back up to St. Louis and then to Chicago. So that's where I was when I got off the train in Chicago. I think at Fort Sheridan.
Okay.
In Chicago. Yeah. And then you just wait until they, get your papers in order. I think you do a physical and make sure you're all set to go back to civilian life.
How long were you there for then?
I don't, a few days, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Is it just horrible, just waiting for it to all be over?
yeah,
Okay. And then you get to come back to Michigan?
yeah, yeah,
You know,
that's
pretty
great.
exciting time to see your family
Yeah,
and your
to
wife.
reunite with the wife and family, and it was great, really.
What did you do after your time in service?
After the service?
Mhm.
Well, I think I said that my wife and I kind of decided what we were going to try to do while I was there and save some money maybe. And she worked for Consumers Power, and we both saved money. And so we were prepared, to maybe buy a small house,
Mhm.
get a car, and that took place. And so, we sort of planned ahead. The house that we bought in Elma, Michigan cost $4,200.
That's great.
And it had a roof on it too.
And where did you start working at?
We decided that I'd go back to school.
Okay.
And, I think I told you this guy I worked for in Korea, he had graduated from college. And one of the things you notice right away is that people that had more skills or more education usually got better jobs. So, I thought, I gotta go back to school.
Uh-huh.
And my wife supported that. And not only that, the government, of course, had the GI Bill, which is a great thing. I think you can still get help if you go into the service, education when you get out. But I guess my personal opinion is we ought to subsidize college for anybody that wants to go.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's a waste not to have kids that want to go to college. You have to fight it. Maybe not be able to afford it. So.
Did you go to the same college that you had previously gone
Went
to?
to Alma College, finished up, actually made the dean's list in my senior years.
Oh, that's good.
So you can see motivation
Yeah.
has a lot to do with it.
What did you study?
I majored in chemistry.
Chemistry is tough.
Yeah, and somehow got through it. And I also, I did play baseball. But just baseball. Had some great times baseball. Our teams won an MIAA championship the 3 years that I played. Played in the NCAA tournament in Kalamazoo. We never won, but we were playing like Northwestern, Notre Dame, I mean, big school. Had some good times though.
And what did you do with your chemistry degree once you graduated?
Well, I looked for a job because my wife got pregnant the year that I was to graduate, and so I needed a job. I went to Dow Chemical, and they made an offer of a job, but I thought the only place for me was in research, which is somebody with a bachelor's degree. When you go to Dow, you need at least a master's or a doctor's degree, really. So they offered me a job, not in research, but I wasn't interested in that.
Okay.
And there's a small chemical company in St. Louis, Michigan, called Michigan Chemical Corporation. They had some openings, and so I went there. Yeah.
What did you work with there?
Well, I actually started working in an area of rare earth chemistry. Are you familiar with the periodic table?
Oh, the periodic table a little bit.
Those elements sort of down on the bottom, like gadolinium, samarium.
All the new ones?
The government, actually, as far as I know, was interested in yttrium, which is a material, an element that also comes out when you dig in the earth and find this rare earth-rich ore.
Okay.
But I think the government wanted yttrium oxide in a fairly pure form for rod control, maybe in reactors.
Okay.
So the company actually had a government contract to make to purify the rare earths. And so I did quite a lot of, I think I worked on that maybe almost a year. And then there was a need for a person in analytical chemistry and research. So I got involved in that, and just had some great times in research in the rare earth area. And the company also extracted bromine from brine that came out of the ground. And we'd, of course, try to exploit bromine and make compounds that would be useful using bromine. And the big thing at that time, one of the big things was flame retarding polymers or plastics. And also having children's sleepwear meet certain flammability standards. So there was government push in that area, so it was a good time to be in that. And it was fairly good business, but the company made other products, including the typical brine products like salt, sodium chloride, and magnesium oxide, and calcium chloride. But there were studies that showed if you fed cows magnesium oxide, that their milk production went up significantly. So they were actually adding magnesium oxide to cattle feed.
Okay.
And for some unexplained reason at the time, some flame retardant got mixed in with the magnesium oxide, and then there was the infamous PBB disaster. I don't know if you haven't heard about it. Okay, well, that's good. But a lot of cattle were slaughtered. There was a lot of concern about the flame retardant chemical getting into the human system. And the company was eventually sued along with Farm Bureau.
Oh.
And the farmer that sued didn't win the case, but eventually it was an event that really destroyed the company.
I had to. So after the lawsuit, were you working still at that point, or did you say, I gotta get another job?
I think I worked at the research facility in St. Louis, where the company was located, from 57 to 80, 1980, I'm sorry, 1975.
Okay.
And then they decided to move the research facility to Ann Arbor, Michigan. So went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they had a real nice research facility. And then after 5 years, the company was actually owned by another company called Velsicol Chemical, and their research facility was in Chicago, Illinois, downtown Chicago.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Chicago?
Yeah.
You heard about Ohio Street? It's right downtown.
I know downtown.
And it goes
I
right
don't
in.
know if I know the street.
It goes right into Lake Michigan, you know.
Okay, so
This-
did you have to move there?
Well, I told my wife, you know, I knew the place because I visited there. Most people, spend an hour just getting to work,
Yeah.
an hour getting home. So I thought, there goes my golf and whatever else. So I said, I'm just going to start looking for another job. And just happened to see an ad in the paper by Howmet Corporation in Whitehall.
Okay.
They were looking for a chemist, and so I was hired in as chief chemist in their facilities there, and it was probably the best move I ever made. Spent 13 years there and retired.
What kind of work do they do?
They actually make turbine engine parts, jet engine parts, mainly that go into the hot zone of an engine.
Okay.
Yep.
So then you
So-
retired like in the late 80s?
93.
93, okay.
Yep. So I've been retired, 15 years about.
Okay.
Yep.
And you said you do something with the Civil War kind of group in Muskegon?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, I think my mother told me one time that her great-grandfather served in the Civil War.
Mhm.
So that when you're retired, you got more time to look into that. Looked into it. I mean, my great-great-grandfather, he served most of the Civil War time with the 13th Michigan Infantry.
Mhm.
And he actually spent a lot of time as a pioneer, and that would be soldiers that would maybe go ahead of the main army, and if there was a bridge needed across the stream or river, they'd build it. So it was kind of a risky job. I mean, your enemy knew that you were doing that. Or railroads. But he ended up with Sherman and the March to the Sea. And it would be 10 days after they started, Sherman's army went into Milledgeville, Georgia, which was the capital of Georgia. And my great-great-grandfather was captured by the Confederates, foraging, because that's how Sherman was able to go through the South. They took everything they could from the farms to eat, to survive by. But he was captured and sent to Richmond, and he was a prisoner. But by that time, neither side knew what to do with captured. They just didn't know. They couldn't handle him, really.
Yeah.
So he survived and came back. And then looking into his records, found out his brother also was enlisted, also ended up with Sherman in a different outfit. And now I'm finding that their father actually enlisted too. And I'm researching that.
Uh-huh.
But there's nothing written or no memorabilia from them. So what you can get, of course, is the military records
Okay.
from the state and from Washington. And does this thing go to Library of Congress or?
Yeah.
Eventually?
Yep.
So, but there's the National Archives in Washington where they keep the military records.
Uh-huh.
been really a great thing to do, really, because you learn more about your ancestors. I wish they'd written a memoir.
You should send some of the stuff to her.
But
The Civil War stuff?
To
the lady that did your interview.
Yeah, she actually has part copyright to that.
Okay.
So she's got it, yeah. In fact, she actually wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can tell because she's really a professional writer, so it flows easy.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever go do any reunions?
Yes.
Yeah?
I think 12 years ago, I did an article for the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. It was in the Chronicle,
Mhm.
Muskegon Chronicle. But there was a fellow who lives in North Muskegon who actually had been going to a graves registration reunion of World War II veterans.
Okay.
And he actually called me, and he said, I know that you're a Korean War veteran, but we've decided to open this up to any veterans that served in graves registration.
Okay.
So I went to the first reunion, I think it was in Springfield, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's interesting to listen to these guys. Those guys were in World War II. So, you know, it was a whole different picture. But they knew, too, that their numbers were dwindling, just like it still is, right? But I think the second year, I can't remember where, they had the reunion down in, I think, Baton Rouge. But these guys had gotten to know me, and they actually voted me the president of the organization in absentia. I wasn't even there. But anyway, I took it. And the next year, I was actually traveling with my wife through Fort Lee, around Fort Lee, Virginia. I said to her, why don't we go to Fort Lee and just see what it looks like? So, you know, they're talking years after I was there as a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually found where the graves registration offices were in Fort Lee. Went in and just told them who I was, and that I had just joined an organization that did reunions. And she said, you know, the guy in charge of graves would be glad to talk to you. And 5 minutes later, I'm talking to the head guy of graves registration.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him about our reunions, and he said, you know, we've been thinking about having reunions again for all graves registration people. So we actually arranged to have the reunion on even years in Fort Lee and odd years someplace in the United States.
Okay.
And it's been a great thing. In fact, I got a lot of stuff here. From one of those reunions that was held at Fort Lee, so you can see they did a nice job.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just happened to be this one. I actually gave a talk about the experiences I had in Korea in graves registration. So, yeah.
So you go to one of these reunions every year?
Yeah, but I haven't gone the last 2 years because my wife has been ill. She died last June. So, yeah. Hey, this is actually just a picture of Korea. I don't know if you remember, the North Koreans invaded South Korea. They actually pushed everything right down almost to what they call the Pusan perimeter.
Okay.
And then enough United Nations troops got back into it that they actually pushed the North Koreans all the way back up here and up to the Yellow River. And this is when the Chinese got into it.
Mm-hmm.
And this was really a bloody mess because the Chinese surrounded our troops, and there were real high casualty. There's still a little over 8,000 missing United States soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
and they're in North Korea. And we're still trying to negotiate with them. Once in a while they'll find a body, but they won't let they won't let us go in there and just search.
Mhm.
So, anyway, the Chinese came in and then they pushed us back, or the United Nations back, to roughly the 38th parallel, which would be right about in here. And that's where then the line stabilized, and then they just started fighting over these hills. And that's the time that I got there.
Okay.
This is another picture of that area around the 38th parallel. And this is where I spent my time in Wanju.
Mhm.
And, but this picture is to identify those mountains that they would fight over.
Mhm.
I mean, we're talking a lot of casualties just fighting over these crazy hills. Yeah, it was terrible, really. Okay, this one. This is just a review. You know, there's they're trying to build a Korean War museum, and I think the latest word is that it's going to be in Springfield, Illinois, and they're trying to raise money, of course, private money, to build that thing.
Okay.
Which would be a great thing, really. Okay? I gave a talk at one of the memorial services in Whitehall. That's my wife.
Okay.
And this is an article in the Chronicle when I went to see the when they dedicated the Korean War National Monument in Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
which was a big thing.
Mhm.
A lot of people there. Let's see. And I've actually had communication just recently with a fellow who published an article in the Graybeards, which is a magazine of the Korean War Veterans Association.
Okay.
And it's a nice magazine.
Okay, I've never heard of that.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm reading through it, and here's an article on Wanju, which is where I spent most of my time in Korea.
Look a little bit different now?
I couldn't believe it. You know, it's a modern city,
Uh-huh.
but we're talking 50-some years ago, too. But when I left there, there were very few permanent buildings. I mean, it was mostly shacks and clay buildings. And so I read the article, and I actually got in contact with the person that wrote this article.
Mhm.
And he was there in 1951 when they were fighting right around this Wanju area. He actually was a company commander, a captain, and had a shell hit by him and took his arm and one leg. And I just talked to him on the email yesterday. He survived that, but they put him on an airplane, evacuation airplane, to take him to a bigger hospital.
Mhm.
And the plane crashed. He was in a stretcher. He actually flew through the window of the plane. And he says he doesn't remember anything because they had him on morphine.
That's maybe a good thing.
And that's right. But he survived that, but he broke the other arm and leg.
Jeez.
But he actually stayed active in the service,
Mhm.
and then spent later years in the Pentagon. But he's a colonel now. So anyway, that to me is real interesting. Oh, he also told me about a book that's been, I think it's about 7 or 8 years old. It's called Wanju, but it describes this fighting around the Wanju area.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of it is detail of the maneuvering and the fighting that went on in that area. And the author is trying to relate Wanju to the Gettysburg, which some people say that Gettysburg was a turnaround and the Union started winning battles.
Okay.
This author says that Wanju was the Gettysburg of Korea. that's when we started to go on the offensive again and stop the Chinese, and North Koreans. But interesting book if you like war to read about. I don't know why I brought this all the way in.
Was there medals?
Yeah.
What are they all for?
I don't know. I'll have to look at them. And this is my wife, and
Okay.
she put this together. One of them slipped there, but that'd be the Korean War Medal,
Mm-hmm.
and that's my dog tag, one of them. And I think there's nothing of valor here. It's just service medals, really.
Okay.
I mean, it's not a Purple Heart or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But represent United Nations or Korean War medals. This would be the, I think they have periods of time that you were there.
Uh-huh.
United Nations medal. Yeah. But my wife put this
That's
together.
nice.
It's nice to have. Yeah. She was a special person. And, let's see. I think just a few years ago, we got a letter. It was a big letter. But it says, letter of appreciation. You get it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually from the president of South Korea.
That's
And-
cool.
And really, he sent this to everybody that served in Korea, thanking, the Americans for helping them in their fight for independence, which is pretty nice, really.
Yeah.
Huh?
Kim
Wish we
Dae-jung.
could- Wish we could get letters like this from Iraq.
I don't know. Okay.
Then, but that was nice to get.
Well, when did you get that?
I think about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And let's see. And I actually took quite a lot of pictures when I was in Korea. And but I'll just show you sort of thing that I've done. But this really shows. My friend, this is the guy that was the carpenter.
Okay.
Just a super guy from Rhode Island, he's now dead. This guy is from Wisconsin, Roy Rogentine,
Mm-hmm.
and he's fighting cancer right now. So anyway, but this sort of thing, this would actually be the compound that I was at most of the time.
Okay.
Typical Jeep. Chaplain visited with us, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures of native Korea. And there were kids still around. Kids love to play, and no matter what's going on, really.
Mm-hmm.
This guy was found hung.
Oh.
Look at that. Let's see. I do have one thing of interest, maybe. Yeah, I took really shots that really give a panorama of the company headquarters.
Uh-huh.
So it'd be like a 180-degree
Okay.
panorama.
Got it.
Got it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'd wake up to every morning.
Uh-huh.
And I guess, looking back, if there was any sacrifice on my part, it would have been that it was 2 years of my life that was taken, serving over there.
Mhm.
But it wasn't wasted, looking back at it. I don't think, anyway. Huh? I'm just gonna slip this back. Yeah, let's see. Add some color shots. And some of the search and recovery work was a little dangerous. And that's a Jeep. We'd actually have to go up like streams to find different battlegrounds.
Mm-hmm.
There was always concern about what they call flash floods. Like if you're in the valley and then there's a rain up the mountain and all of a sudden you're getting washed away. This would be the airplanes that the deceased were flown to Japan in.
How many do you think that they would put on each plane?
You know, I would guess about 2 dozen maybe.
Okay.
I guess. More of the same. But, and I've got a lot more pictures, but I didn't bring them. I had enough. Yeah, let's see, anything else? I'm actually a jock. You know, I said I played football,
Baseball.
baseball.
Mhm.
After I got my job, I played a lot of softball, fast pitch softball. Now girls are playing fast pitch softball.
Yeah.
Big time, huh? Never thought I'd ever see the day. And I got to golfing, and I golfed at the Gratiot Country Club in Ithaca, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was club champion 3 times. And then I started playing racquetball because Alma College put in some courts. And a friend of mine and I started playing racquetball and fell in love with the game. And that was about the time we moved to Ann Arbor.
Uh-huh.
And I had some success, early success in some tournaments. And next thing you know, I'm teaching racquetball at the Y in
Really?
Ann Arbor. Yeah. And I think I won the state championship in my age bracket several times. And then competed nationally. And was ranked #1 in the nation in my age bracket for a very brief time, which is not easy because you have to play a lot of tournaments.
Uh-huh.
And my wife went with me, so that's a good thing. I was inducted to the Michigan Racquetball Hall of Fame in 1984.
That's cool.
Yeah. So
Still play?
I still play a little bit, but 2 weeks ago I had a back spasm, a muscle spasm.
Mhm.
You ever had a muscle spasm?
Mm.
You don't want one. It just kind of slows you down. So, yeah. But I still like to play. Yeah.
What do you think about reinstating the draft?
You know, looking back, I think one of the biggest mistakes this country made was to give a president more powers.
Uh-huh.
That Congress really is the one to authorize war.
Mhm.
The part of government that's authorized to do that, but they've actually given up their right and said, Mr. President.
Just by not doing anything.
Yeah. So I'd say Vietnam War and where we're at now, if we'd actually had Congress review going into war, we wouldn't be where we're at now.
Right.
To me, it was a big mistake, and they should take that right back. I mean, there are cases like in the Cold War where you might be attacked by the Russians and you had to react real fast. But,
Yeah.
But, have it so that after so many days, that Congress still has to meet and declare war. And there was a while we didn't even know if this thing in Iraq was war. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
Conflict.
Conflict, and so when just a few people can take us to war, there's something wrong in a democracy. That's my opinion, and I've seen the results of war.
Mm.
And really, what the objective of war is to kill your enemy or make it so uncomfortable for them that they don't want to fight anymore,
Mhm.
which usually involves killing. must be better ways to do things, not get quickly wrapped into a big war. I don't know if you know how I feel that it's draining the reserves and the assets of this country. I mean, I don't know, you're young and you're gonna have to pay for
Yeah.
this stuff. And that's the other thing, I just don't understand how we can go to war and expect people at home not to sacrifice. If we had to sacrifice, I don't think we'd be there very long.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, sacrificing by having to pay for the war through taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, maybe actually start thinking about saving materials that are critical to the war effort. You know.
So maybe if they started talking more about reinstating the draft, then people would get more involved, and maybe there'd be more pressure to pull out of Iraq.
Everybody would be involved, because if anybody has children or grandchildren,
No one wants to go.
Nobody wants to go.
Mhm.
And then you start, it'll back up real fast. But nobody wants to, no politician wants to talk about the draft.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions. Did you have any other memories that you kind of maybe forgot about that you wanted to talk about?
Just my wife.
Mhm.
She was a great person. We were married 55 years. She supported me, and she supported the family, and great wife. And, she actually had cancer in 1981. She had breast cancer. Had a mastectomy and took care of it.
Mhm.
She didn't even have chemo or radiation. A few years later, she had uterine cancer. Surgery took care of it. She did have radiation there. Then a few years after that, there was a tumor developed on the scar of the mastectomy, which is not common, but it does happen. Surgery again, and she had radiation for that. Then a few years later, had colon cancer, and surgery, and no radiation or chemo. But then last year, she developed lymphatic cancer, and that's fast. And she was 80 years old, and they said, let's try chemo.
Mhm.
But it just knocked her so hard. So she tried a dose, but it was too much. Yeah. I miss her.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.